early stage startups with strong cultures and founders that are actually team oriented, it really does feel like you win and lose as a team. And I think that, like, at least my experiences. And so I would hope that folks who've worked with us feel that way versus maybe something a little bit more adversarial.
Welcome to the Delta Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Coale. This is the show where we dive into the relationship between leadership and change, what it means for individuals, teams, and organizations looking to optimize. Today's a great day to be coachable, so let's jump in. Dan Romero, it's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited to have this conversation. I want to get into a quick intro of you. You're the founder of Farcaster, among other things. And I'd like to begin the conversation by sharing with you something that I appreciate. This is a podcast about leadership, and specifically leadership and change. And I want to share something that made an impression on me in terms of your own leadership. If we could start there, how does that sound for you?
Sounds great.
So a few years ago, so I'm 40, I just turned 40. When I was 37, I started social media. And so I was new to Twitter, and I was seeing things come across my feed, and I saw your post about Farcaster. I didn't know anything about it, and I thought, this is kind of interesting. I'm new to social media. This is a new social media platform. It feels like there's alignment there. So I sent you a DM, and you pinged me back, and you said, sure, here's an invite. And that was 3 years ago. It was August 2022. I was one of the first 1,900 people on the social media thing that you're building. And the fact that you opened the door for me was an early data point. The second significant data point came when I had a genuine question. Okay. So somebody in my village was asking me, where do I go to learn Microsoft Excel? I don't know Microsoft Excel, but I figured the biggest collection of smart tech people that I know exist on Farcaster. And so I'm going to put that question out there. And to date, it's like one of the most engaged with posts that I have. Some folks are giving me a hard time. Some folks are giving me shit, ribbing me, which I appreciate. The thing that surprised me, if you look down in the comments, about midway through, you chimed in. I don't know if you remember this.
No.
You chimed in, and I want to read what you said because this made an impression on me. And this is what you said. I would imagine GPT spreadsheet is only a year or two off. Now, that makes a lot more sense to me today than it did back then. But what I really appreciated is that you have created this environment where I felt, as an outsider, not a technical person, comfortable putting an idea on the table and trusting that people are going to engage with it. And the founder, who's got 1,000 things going on, took a moment to engage with it as well. And that was an early experience that I've had with the community, and that has remained consistent throughout. So that's what I love about what you're doing and what you're building. And I wanted to share that with you.
Oh, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about your leadership journey. And I'm curious, I want you to go back. We've got some time. You were born, and then what?
Well, I was born. I was the oldest of four boys. Grew up in a smaller town, so not particularly exposed to the sophisticated side of things in the world. Went to college, and I think college was pretty eye-opening for me in that I'd done pretty well in school before, and thought I knew a thing or two, at least as much as you could for an 18-year-old. And I think going to college was like, whoa, like, world's a lot bigger. There's a lot of different types of people who are very sophisticated at 18 based on their experiences and things like that. So I think that was a bit of my first real shock in life in terms of like own identity and like, where do I fit into this puzzle and things like that.
Do you remember a moment when you had that horizon expanding experience?
No, I think generally it was my freshman year. I think I had a heavy accent in the scheme of things relative to what I have now. I had just Massachusetts accent. So my ahs were what you would see on Good Will Hunting or something. Maybe not that extreme, but I think people could peg me as being from Massachusetts and things there. So that was a subconscious accent disappeared, right? Like, you spend 4 years away, you hang around people from California or other places, like you kind of meld in a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think like the other thing that was interesting about college is like, you spend all this time in high school, I think is like pretty structured in the scheme of things, because you're kind of like the whole goal is to go to college, or at least that was the thing I was focused on. And then you get to college and it's like, you can do whatever you kind of want. You can major what you want. You can spend your time and free time on whatever you kind of want. There's a lot of downtime in college. And so I think for me, it was like very much like an area where I was able to explore a bunch of interests. I tried starting a few like businesses, like internet kind of businesses. Randomly got super into film for a while, like not making films, but just like
what kind of
there
film?
was just the library, and this is like pre-streaming, so I'm a little bit of a boomer. Is like the library had like 10,000 DVDs, and you could just like go there and take them and go back and watch. And so, I mean, I only imagine like if I had ChatGPT in college, I don't even know if I'd ever left my room. So like, there's a certain aspect of it, like I'm glad this is happening later in my life, but I think very much just like always very curious about a lot of things. I think one challenge with that is I didn't actually kind of like go deep on one thing and become excellent at that. And I wouldn't say it's a regret, but it's definitely something that a lot of people I've encountered in my career is like roughly around college, they kind of like picked one or two things and then they got, world class at them or started on the path. And I think I just always had too many interests. And so, I could kind of go some level of depth there, but never to the point where it's like, no, you hit that spot where it's like, okay, now you're literally top 1% or top 0.1% in whatever thing that you were doing. So I think there's like a framework to think about that. It's like fox versus hedgehog. I'm very much a fox versus hedgehog.
I've never heard that framework before. You say that again.
There's an apocryphal. You can, for those listening, you can go look up Fox and Hedgehog's story. But the idea is like the fox is kind of like clever and like knows a lot about a lot of different things, versus the hedgehog is like kind of very focused on one thing, like just like focus on the one thing and be excellent at that. And it's just like my reflection of like interesting people I've met, especially in Silicon Valley. People have different modes, but I do think like hedgehog is actually a very powerful trait to have. And I think one interesting thing about the education system in the US, in my view, is it actually very much discourages you from like going deep on one thing. It's like this whole like idea of like, okay, you need to have this and this and like, kind of fill out this cookie cutter version of like well-roundedness. So I think the long story short is like, I basically didn't know what I wanted to go do from a career standpoint. At one point I thought I would want to go to law school. I'd always been interested in computers, but my family wasn't necessarily particularly technical. So like engineering wasn't necessarily a thing that was not necessarily valued, but like I didn't have any engineering role models. Right. And so I was like, okay, go to college and then go to law school. And like that's like a good progression. I ended up not wanting to do that. And so by my senior year, I'm like, okay, what am I going to do?
Well, hang on a second. How did you realize
I spent a
that's
summer
not the path you
working
want to get on?
For the Attorney General in Rhode Island, specifically in the Narcotics and Organized Crime Unit. So it felt like kind of like The Wire, which was cool. But you realize like so much of what they're doing from a lawyer standpoint is like, I think mind-numbingly boring. It's not your courtroom movie, John Grisham novel where you're kind of like making these amazing. You can get some of that, but I think generally there's just like a lot of bureaucratic overhead. A lot of rote repetition of the same things, and it's a super political environment in ways. And so like, I could have gone another summer and tried like, what is it like to be at a law firm and a paralegal, but whatever. I was 21, 22. It just like, it felt like this is not what I want to go spend my time on. And so senior year, bit of a crisis in terms of like, okay, well, I don't have any real skills here. What am I going to go do? And I ended up interviewing for management consulting jobs, which for those who don't know what management consulting is, you're certainly not management. And if you're getting a job coming out of college with no skills, I don't know really what you're doing from a consulting standpoint. Turns out that like, and I ended up getting one of those jobs, and worked in Boston. It just like a recruiting thing for like they try to find people that they think are smart, and conscientious and whatever factors, and bit of a game in terms of like going through the interview process or whatever, and then they just spend time training you. So you get a couple months of training, and then they throw you onto a project, and it's like, okay, build this Excel model, or make this PowerPoint deck, and you just do a lot of on the job training. And you can think of it as like a pyramid, as like there's a senior person who's actually worked with dozens of companies in a specific area. So if you're working on a healthcare project, the actual partner, the person at the top of the pyramid, is doing consulting, right? Like they've learned a lot from other businesses, best practices, etc. Then they farm the kind of like actual work product of like what you're helping the business analyze their data and all this other kind of stuff. And you're the lowest level cog in that machine. The job is interesting as a like a 22, 23-year-old, because you get exposure to a bunch of different industries. You get exposure to corporate America, right? Like at actually a much higher level than you would normally. Like you're going into meetings with the CEO and the management team.
Pretty significant.
Quiet in the back taking notes, but the point is like you're getting a lot of like crash course. One way I framed it is like it's like Navy SEALs, not that extreme, but like it from a business education standpoint. I think 2 years of management consulting is way better than business school, because you're actually just like in understanding like how these businesses works at a much more low level, and you like realize how messy data is, and like bringing it between, you understand corporate politics, and so I think that's like a great exposure to just like how does this capitalism thing work, at least in the American flavor of like bigger companies. But I knew like I kind of didn't want to be in that long term, but the thinking was like go into this, and you just like magically take like kind of like a college educated person with no skills, like literally no marketable skills, to after 2-3 years of doing this, you're actually kind of like what you'd call a biz ops person. Like you can get hired at a tech company to just like solve general problems, because some other company basically gave you a credential of saying you were employed here for 3 years. And so that's kind of like where I started in tech, is like I got like turned into a cog that can be put in a tech company with some set of skills of like using Microsoft Excel and PowerPoint, basically. Maybe that was a longer answer than you wanted, but
that's a great answer.
Okay.
So bring it up to the present. How long ago was that?
So that is 2013. Okay. I moved to San Francisco. So I quit. I moved to San Francisco. I didn't have a job. One of my college kind of like roommates, close friends, Fred Ursum, was co-founder of this company called Coinbase, the Bitcoin company. He's like, hey, we just raised a round of financing. Do you want to come and like maybe be like this like customer support, like just the first kind of employee? We have a bunch of problems we need to solve. I'm like, magic internet money, no way. Like, see ya. Moved to Silicon Valley, go get a job as the first employee at another company. And
you said no initially.
Yeah, no initially, working on completely different thing, like some SaaS company.
Yeah.
It was me and two founders, and like I wasn't a founder, I was just the first employee, but ground up startup, learned a lot there, learned a lot about sales. And then a year later I was like, okay, I actually, having spent time in Silicon Valley and like hearing people get excited about Bitcoin, I kind of finally, instead of just judging it by the cover, like read the white paper, dug in, and then I couldn't really stop thinking about it. So 2014, about a year later, I joined Coinbase as like a business person, like biz ops, biz dev. And my first project was like get people to accept Bitcoin as a payment method for like Dell.com to buy a computer, or 1-800-Flowers. In retrospect, it was really stupid, because like Bitcoin is a terrible payment method, at least in like all the UX and kind of like paper cuts that you have with it. And there was no incentive for a consumer to use it. They weren't even like giving you like cash back. Like it was just like, you spend your Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I kind of did that for a bit, and then switched over to actually doing a new problem, which was a problem for the business. And this is actually, I think, one thing that's great about joining an early stage startups is they're quite dynamic in that the problems change very fast. And one day you can be trying to get 1-800-Flowers to accept Bitcoin, and literally the next week it's like, okay, new project. You need to go find us a bank that's willing to support our business of like converting fiat currency to cryptocurrency, in this case Bitcoin, in Europe.
And nobody's ever done that before, by the way.
Yeah, and by the way, like we don't really know. No one at the company has qualifications to do this, but you worked in consulting, so you can kind of like put on a suit and like sort of show up. Didn't have facial hair, or like he's like you can just show up and seem respectable at a bank. Good luck, Dan.
Yeah.
And so that was the thing, and so spent a summer basically in Europe. I was going back and forth, but found a random, not a random. They ended up being a great partner. Randomly found a bank in Estonia, which
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever been to Estonia. It's a very small country.
Have not.
And that bank, it's like finding a bank in Delaware or Rhode Island. It's like if you're one country in the EU, you can actually support all of it. And so in doing that, that was kind of like my first big win at Coinbase. And it shifted me in the long-winded way from being an individual contributor to a manager. So like it was like, oh, cool. Well, this guy got us a bank in Europe. Now can we go get other banks in other countries? You can hire two people to help you. And so I went from kind of like just figuring it out on my own to, okay, now I'm in charge of this like international expansion was what it was called. And I had two people who ended up joining my team. And so I managed a pair of two people for about a year at that point.
And what was that like? You're still relatively new to the organization, new to this business stuff, and now you're managing people, which a lot of folks would say is a little bit different than the technical side of things.
Yeah, so very much. I think it was a hard transition for me in that I am very much a person that doesn't like delegate. I just generally have an attitude is like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it better than the other person. Like in things that I have competence in. It's one thing. It's like, okay, I'm not a good engineer. I'm not going to claim that. But like, I figured out how to find a bank. I'm probably better at finding a bank than the person I'm hiring. But that doesn't work in a business because you actually need to be able to scale and like you need to actually like get more leverage, and then more importantly, be a leader and a coach and a mentor. Is like, can you take the skill set and knowledge you have and actually get other people to do it and like build a team. So I think that took me a while. Like I just think shifting from that mentality and how do you motivate? How do you like when people aren't doing something right? Like what's that kind of right strategy of like being prescriptive versus letting people fail, and like the learning that you get from failure is actually potentially in the right scenario and then the right risk tolerance is actually more valuable than if I point out you're going to make a mistake and then instead do it like this. And so I think a lot of trial and error. But yeah, so I think like I improved my competence a bit in terms of like, okay, having a couple direct reports, making sure that they're well, kind of organized and like pointing in the right direction, which I actually think is probably the biggest lesson there is like, you can work a lot on the margins, but if like you have them working on the wrong problem, that's actually 80% of it.
Can you say more about that? How do you, because I imagine leaders listening thinking that sounds, I got you, Dan. But how do I ensure people are pointed in the right direction?
Well, and again, I don't think I was particularly good at this, but you can imagine a well-run company has like what is the thing the company is optimizing for? So it's like people call this North Star. Easier said than done to define it because everyone wants to like modify it, and then there's caveats, and it's like, oh, well, you can game it like this if you do. But generally, just make the assumption that you actually have a goal that everyone kind of has agreed is like, this is the goal that we want to drive. Something usually around either revenue or users or whatever. Then your role is what is the function that you're in charge of, right? So if you're the CEO, then it's like you got to actually got everyone to work towards that goal. But if you're like kind of a manager or an exec, like your goal is like, okay, well, I'm in charge of international expansion. And so if our goal here is revenue, like how do I actually grow revenue? And there's two, generally basic things. It's like either increase the surface area where you can generate the revenue or, so like breadth or depth, right? So starting to break this problem down into the component parts. And then I think part of it is gut. It's just like, okay, you maybe do a brainstorming session with your team, with the founder or whatever, try to get input from other smart people, and then a lot of times it's like, well, we don't know actually what the best thing is to go do, but this is the current best idea based on the information that we have. Brian Armstrong has this like great line of like being founder of Coinbase, action produces information. Great. So you're going to only operate with like whatever information you can kind of put together, try to be thoughtful about it. And then it's like, this is the hypothesis. Roughly how long do we want to go test this? Let's go do it. And I think like getting good at doing that as it relates to priorities, and then actually having that to people who report to you. And then I think where it gets more advanced is if those people have people who report to them, you're playing this game of telephone where the fidelity each time, right? Like if you're sitting at the top of this pyramid, like by the third rung down, like
who knows what that message is?
Right. So I think that's the second thing I learned. And maybe to shift a little bit more. So kind of like within the first year and a half, I got promoted to run a bunch of other functions that I had no experience running. So I was running recruiting, I was running finance, I was running biz dev, I was running international expansion, like corporate IT. So it's like literally like people's ability to like get laptops when they joined. And it's just like I ended up having an org about like 50 people, right? And like multiple layers deep for the first time. And I think recruiting was like a good example of one where it's like you kind of had a head of recruiting, then we had a couple of managers. There are different functions within recruiting. You have sourcing, you have like kind of like the recruiting experience, and then like there's like interop with HR, and then you have like one level down where it's like those are the pods of people executing. And so that was like a good example of something where I went into that with like a consultant mindset, which is very quantitative of like, great, well, let's get a recruiting funnel together. And it kind of failed, even though like, I think in my understanding, like the more you learn about it, it's like well-run recruiting functions generally approach it with like a funnel mentality, because that's how you just have bigger companies work. But it wasn't necessarily intuitive for the person running recruiting, who had been running recruiting when we were much smaller, and it was like basically an individual contributor thing. And so that was a good lesson for me, is like, just because this is a best practice and you talk to 3 other companies and this is how they do it, like you just can't go deliver like from high. It's like, here are the tablets, like please go do that. And so I think that experience was very challenging for me, in that I had to and now I had like 6 direct reports, different functions. And so the same thing that would work for recruiting isn't going to work for the finance guy. No, and isn't going to work for the. And then, by the way, it's like my old team is like, you're not even spending any time with me anymore. And so I think like you kind of learn to be like, okay, now I don't have as much time to go depth. So I actually have to get better at going back to this thing of like set the right priority, and then like make sure that that is clear. And you spend even more time thinking about what the right thing to work on is, because you have less ability to like go deep. Right.
And it takes time. You got to understand individual people's needs and their role within this mix that you're talking about. I mean,
and especially if you haven't hired them, right? Because like, if you inherit people, like you might have worked with them as a colleague, but like to actually manage someone for the first time,
it's different.
Yeah, and then you quickly realize, whoa, I was doing all this like roundup, team recruiting with people when I was weighing in on culture or whatever, but I wasn't managing them. You tend to be a little bit more like, I'll be a little bit nicer, or, I'm going to look for the optimistic, positive side of things. But after you've managed a bunch of people, or having to manage people through people who are underperforming, like not directly to you, but like you realize like how important your hiring process for a company to be in effect. Like, I think good leaders at companies, like one secret about that is like the companies generally have good hiring processes. And if you get great people in, it makes the leader look more effective. Whereas if you these are not, it's not a judgment on the person. It just might not be just as effective, or they don't work with ambiguity, especially in a startup, right? They might be a big company person where they're like, if they have more structure, that works. Like, so I think and all of this is trial and error, right? So it's just like, you just get hard lessons. And like, here's another good example is like, I was, less experienced. I think I always thought I can, I'm just going to spend more time and try to fix the situation. When the reality is actually, it's better most of the time. If you know in your gut that this is not going to change, like you're not going to improve the situation. It's like a core, like I think people's judgment is like pretty good there. You're actually better off probably, parting ways with the person. And
Mm.
that's really challenging because if you're conflict avoidant, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, we've developed this relationship or whatever. But like knowing when to actually swap person out or promote or demote some, like there's just so much messiness. And the human relationship you develop with these people makes it so much harder, right? Because it's not a judgment of them as a person, but like as a leader, like your whole goal is to actually like manage the organization and like the effectiveness of the overall team.
Yes.
And so I think like one contrast compared to my time at Coinbase versus Farcaster, and I give Varun a lot of credit because I think he had a very similar journey in terms of like kind of on the battlefield being promoted to being manager at Coinbase and learning a lot of that stuff. Is I think one, our hiring bar at Farcaster has been so much higher even than Coinbase. Like
Is that right?
anytime there's a little bit of like, I don't like, it's a no. And like
Mm.
that's really challenging because we do a process where we have a very efficient interview process and we do a 3-day work trial. And
Yeah.
when you've worked for someone for 3 days and it feels like it could work, and then you have that little sign, and we've tried it. We've had a
Yeah.
couple of instances where we basically were like, let's the benefit of the doubt. Within 2 weeks, we were like, why did we not trust our intuition on this?
Mm.
And it's because it's like, wow, recruiting is really, really hard. And so I think like that has been a huge game changer for us is we have a really, really high hiring bar, which sucks because it also like means you let a lot of people that you enjoy meeting in the interview process, you just don't bring onto the team.
Well, it's time consuming and
Yeah.
expensive.
And when you get to someone in a work trial and you get to a no, it's just like, how did we just spend
Yeah. It sucks for
10
everyone.
hours with this person on interviews, let alone 3 days of like kind of having them work.
I want to ask
Second
a
thing,
follow up.
which I think, and
Yeah.
I'll finish with this one, is we've just been way more aggressive when something isn't working out within the first 3 months. And
Mm.
that is a thing that I was not good at Coinbase. But I think like it always feels awkward, but it ends up being so much better as the person ends up finding something else, right? You can be supportive. You can, give them severance, like clear, just like, hey, this isn't working. And then I think that the other important thing is the rest of the team. It subconsciously just like the team feels more efficient and
Mm.
faster. And we're in a remote environment, which makes it a little different because I think when you have people in person, it gets even harder. But I think on average for us, like that, this muscle of like performance management is so difficult because of the human element, but it is actually so essential to like the people that you're working with are like they adapt to the kind of style and things like that. So that's been a leadership evolution for me. And let's say I'm doing something after Farcaster, I think that those lessons will always be there. Is like be so hard on letting people come in because it is
Mm-hmm.
no matter what, it's really hard letting someone go. But
Yeah.
then if you make a mistake, fix the mistake fast. And
Mm.
that is a thing where if I even just think about my time at Coinbase, if I had the like mentality and skill set as a leader now on that, I think actually a lot of painful lessons that I ended up having to go through would have been solved by just saying like, you know what, if we actually have one less person right here, it's okay
Mm-hmm.
because the amount of time we're spending on this one other person where it's just not working out is actually hurting the rest of the team because you can't spend as much time with those.
Yeah. Well, and we're sending a message too. We're creating culture.
Yes.
The longer we let this just stay the way it is, I want to follow up here because I think this is a really important. You're approaching 20 folks on your team,
Mm-hmm.
and I know people out there, Matt Mashari included, would say once we get beyond 10, that's an inflection point. People expect stability that they don't necessarily expect when it's just single digits.
Yeah.
Say a little bit more, if you will, about the hiring process, because I think of hiring as always a risk investment.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've figured out some stuff that works. And
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about your non-negotiables as a leader and the organization. What are the things that we hire for? What are the things that we just can't live with? And then what advice might you have for folks who are, maybe they got an idea, they got somebody that they're working with, and they're trying to scale not just the thing they're building, but the team as well. What advice would
Yeah.
you have for them?
So Varun and I have some. He's actually, I think, working on a blog post at some point. He'll post this, but so non-negotiables, no assholes. Like actually, any sign of just someone who, and again, it depends on your culture, but like in our culture, it's like they're very low ego. We're truth seeking, so it's not like I'm right. It's like, no, the whole goal here is like, can we make the best decision with imperfect information, which is basically everything you do. The moment you catch some of that in, like, it comes across as and look, I'm a pretty confident person or whatever, but it comes across as this, little signs in the interviews. No, that's like an immediate, like, this isn't going to work. I think that the next big thing, and again, this is something actually Coinbase has like as one of their values, but I think it is the single most important thing, is how good of a communicator is someone. Because I think,
what do you mean by that?
So if you're technically good at whatever role you're doing, but in any interaction I'm having with you, it feels like, Coinbase had this term high bandwidth, which got very controversial, and they had to like soften it, like clear communication. But I actually think it's the right thing. It's like, if you're a high bandwidth person, like in terms of how you communicate, like you move quickly in terms of like, okay, I get the problem. Like you need to match that style. And so you need to like kind of make sure whatever the norms that you communicate internally, like if you are a remote company and you do a lot of async Slack messages, they have to be an excellent writer. They can't, like, you can't be reading something and just be like, what is going on here? This is like a wall of text or whatever. And thinking people can adapt to that, I'm very like, basically like savvy people, like quickly, like you get into the work trial, they see how other people message on the company, and then they like literally their style matches, right? Because they're observing that. And I think communication style, and to be clear, there's other types of communication styles that I'm sure work, but you need to actually map it to your own. Because the other thing is I think like one basic thing is you should never be like, oh, I have to hop on a call internally with X person. And like, you're literally just feeling your energy go down. Like, it's one thing if you work at a big company and like you're there and like there are people not outside of your control. But if you're running a startup, a 20-person startup, and there is a single person that anytime you hop on a call with, it's not like they're a bad person. It's just like you're like, oh, this is going to be really painful. And like, what are you doing? Right? Like you need to be completely aligned with the kind of like core part of your team. And so I think that communication, all those little manifestations, both in the interview and then like any version of a work trial, flags on that's actually going to just like compound in a lot of different other ways. And then I think like the honest answer is like, a lot of people think that they want to work at a startup, and then, whether they're coming from a big company or like they're coming from another company that like has a cadence that might be lower than yours, is you need to, whether you do a work trial process, which is like literally we pay the people 3 days, you come and work on a project with us. Like if you're working another job, you take vacation, and like that's the commitment we want. Is it's not about FaceTime, but it's this idea that like you're coming into a simulated work environment, right? Like, and everyone is like watching kind of how you're doing it. And if basically it like kind of feels like they're pretty casual in how they're approaching that, this is supposed to be like max output, like unsustainable, probably level. Like the whole goal here is to impress. Yeah. And if what you get is like maybe their average day, and that is like probably like, this is probably where you're peaking in terms of like output. And so the average day is probably going to be even lower than that. And so I think, again, every company can be different. But if you are running a venture-backed company, so time preference is extremely high, and not just the founders, but like the average output per person and cadence per person is high, bringing someone in that is lowering that is just like, it's going to have an impact on your culture. Yeah. And it'll be basic. It'll just start, or very subtle. People will just kind of start to be like, well, that person is not like always kind of putting the same level of effort in. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that. And it's like an individual decision. And again, not a judgment, but like you need to be very protective of like what your specific company culture is. And then if people don't map that, right? So for us, that's no assholes. That's clear communication. And it's like a bias for output. Like, if you have someone coming in from a big company and they're like, oh, this will take 2 weeks. It's like, no, we need to figure out how the version that takes 2 days. And that requires you, and one of the reasons we tend to hire more senior people tend to have a good way of like, okay, well, if I have to make that trade-off, here's how I'd approach it, or here's the simplest version, or here's the thing that can get us the goal we want. Yes, we don't get all these other nice benefits, but like the whole point here is like the right like decision-making trade-offs.
Yeah. This is a great list. I'm going to play this back. No assholes, communication. And I wrote down cadence. Your edit there, I think, was great. Bias for output. Yeah. I noticed in there, Dan, I didn't hear anything. I'm sure there's a lot of rigor in your hiring process. And so people are technically skilled too within their own domain. But I want to say that jumped out to me that is not, you're not seeking the preeminent person on this sort of thing. There are other elements in there that are non-negotiable when you talk about the team you're building and the culture that you're conscientiously creating.
Yeah, I would say it's like people tend to focus a lot on that. And it's like, that is to me just a binary. It's like, it's a necessary, but not like the whole thing is like, can they do the work? Yes. Okay, great. Now here are the 3 things to evaluate them as it relates to your culture, right? You can't make the MBA if you can't score points, right? Sure. But like actually a toxic teammate hurts the ability for the other high performers on that. And toxic in the sense of like, or someone who doesn't jive with the culture, right? I'm a big fan of the Patriots. I grew up in Massachusetts. Bill Belichick kills me the way that ended. But like, I think there's something so powerful about like the Patriot way. For those who don't know, it's just like, this is a football team that basically said, put Tom Brady to the side because it was a bit of like, he bought into the whole culture there. No one on this team in a kind of a league that has a lot of stars and personalities, like, it is about the team. And if you come in and try to make it about you, boom, we're going to boot you. Even if we paid you a big contract or whatever, it's like the core thing is the championship winning teams are teams, not individuals. Right. And so I think like so much of what makes a team is like you're deliberate about a culture, and there can be different winning cultures. Right. Uber was a winning culture for its era, and they're kind of a disintegrate, but it is a very different culture than Airbnb. But that's also a winning culture.
Yeah.
But the thing is like both of those founders and cultures are deliberate, and that is, I think, I have a friend who was an early at Facebook, and his point was like a lot of Facebook's values, like the little famous red book thing that they had, move fast and break things. They are statements that if you give that to the average company, that would not be a value there, right? Move fast and break things is a great, and it's kind of getting overplayed at this point. But the point is that if you said that at a Fortune 500 company, no Fortune 500 company has a culture of move fast and break things. Yeah. It's like, don't break things, like risk aversion. Yeah. And so I think good cultural values basically help create a unique culture for you and something that's distinguishing, versus something that sounds good that other companies do, right? It's like, we hire for technical excellence. Okay, great. I think like another like interesting example, this is actually something I learned in management consulting. I worked at a company called Bain, and at cost is the way Bain describes it. And it's kind of weird, but here's an example. Even at Bain, where you're kind of like, okay, I'm a consultant. I'm in this kind of like, this is the group of people that are like really valuable because literally what you're rented out from a time basis like that. And then there are a bunch of other employees in the organization that help support the like consulting. But it was like very much a 2-tier, kind of like 2 types of employees. The idea of at cause is, let's say you're in the cafeteria there and an overflowing trash can. Not your job. Someone in the janitorial staff probably handles it. But the culture, and it might have been like kind of dying out a bit, but senior partners were very into this, is if I walk past that overflowing trash can and it's not my problem, and a senior partner would see that, they would ream you out, right? And I don't remember exactly 1 or 2 examples where this happened, but I remember the reaming out. I didn't know the reason, not necessarily for me, but for other people. But I think that's an amazing value, right? Yeah. It's actually one I think of, like, even in my own family, like this idea of at cause. It's like, yeah, you didn't cause the problem, but problem needs to get fixed. So what are you doing to fix the problem? In a big organization, that cause is usually not it's like someone else's problem. Like, whereas in a startup, like that problem could be existential, right? Site is down. That's a super basic one. You going to wait for the person to get the pager duty, or are you going to be the first one to report in Slack, hey, I think the site's down. Yeah. No response in 2 minutes. Do I actually ping someone? And there's like a right balance there, right? It's like you don't need to be like overly doing that, but this idea of like culture, you know, and a team, and like the idea is like we have a shared goal that we're trying to achieve. Like, I think those are all things that are really important to foster at a small size, because you can't add it later.
No, much harder. I think of it as like there's a default culture that people may be bringing in, and if we want to introduce something different into the ecosystem, we've got to work our ass off to make sure that happens.
And you have to make very specific call outs when it doesn't or does happen. Otherwise,
which is hard to do.
Yeah, because you make the examples, and then those are the teaching moments. And I think one other thing I learned at Coinbase, this is in 2018, so we'd had this phenomenal amount of growth, like 100x growth. Like we made $1 billion in 2017. So all of a sudden the company went from this like, oh, crypto to like, oh, crypto, like this is cool. So we go and hire all these executives, right? So like all the functions I was managing, like now had like some fancy exec who had worked at Facebook or Google or wherever. Every single one of these execs brings the company culture that they came from into the company. So now it's like you think that these people are coming to help, but actually in some ways it's like getting infected with like 5 different diseases, and your cultural immune system is overwhelmed.
Yes.
And that actually I think was very challenging for Brian, and I think he did a phenomenal job managing it live, right? Like there's no reset of like, okay, let's get rid of these people and then like have them come in. Also, while the company is growing, like at any given time, 30% of employees are new in the last 3 months, which means
good luck.
The culture that existed before is like the ship of Theseus. Like you are literally like only as a percentage of the company. And I actually think even about this with Farcaster at different points when we've grown is like the nature of the network changes. And then people like don't have the history and context for how the network does. And this is how we do things on this network. And it's more civil and all this, because they're just bringing in habits from other networks. Right. And so I think that is also like, you can't teach someone that. You have to go through a really painful lesson of culture shock with both execs and new employees who, and I think one way to think about culture as you scale is it's how people make decisions in the absence of the founder.
Can you say that again?
So good culture as you scale a company. I know everyone on the team. I talk to them every day. Like I can basically be, or everyone can be involved in everything, right? 200 people, 2,000 people. There are going to be so many different decisions that get made every day that the founder is not even like 2 levels aware. But if you have a strong culture and like a, you know, really ingrained and spent the time developing that, then people are going to make the decisions like the founder would in on margin or closer to how the founder would, right? And so I think like, you know, a very simplistic example, but like if you work at Apple, you could argue maybe the culture has degraded since, but like Steve Jobs' emphasis on design means that the marginal decision in anything that happens with Apple has an eye towards what is the aesthetic or design of this thing, right? Uber, I didn't work there, but this idea of like bias for like extreme action, take the risk, ask for forgiveness later, that was part of that culture, right? And so I think that is so important as you scale from a leadership standpoint, because you can't, and I mean, even you see this, I was never in the military, but like, you know, kind of reading about, okay, the Marine Corps has a specific culture and how that gets pushed down and how things are done, that allows for scaled leadership, right? Like it's like the general does not have to manage the lieutenant, but the lieutenant is very much steeped in this is the culture of how we do things, right?
You're a synthetic thinker. One of the things that I talk about is the importance of synthetic leadership. So pulling from all these experiences, all the learning that you've done and all the behaviors you've picked up in different places, and then figuring out what's a constellation. How do I apply those? So I want to flip the question for a second. You've talked about lessons learned at other organizations, other experiences. But imagine for a second I was years from now talking to somebody who's worked with you or for you at Farcaster. What would you hope that that individual would say about the experience of working with this team?
I mean, I say it when I'm interviewing people in terms of like pitching the company. It's challenging work with smart colleagues and not a lot of overhead. And I think that that is probably what I would say from Farcaster, at least today. I think one thing that has been interesting is management is it's player coach right now, and that I am very much, and so is Varun. We're in the trenches on everything, and like very much co-creating whatever we're doing. And I think that that's sufficient, or the right strategy for an early consumer startup, in the sense that like it is very much actually the vision that the founders are trying to manifest. And so if you try to remove yourself from that too much, I think you lose it. Now, if we hit some crazy growth seam and it's like really working, we have to scale the organization. I think there will be a different phase. And this is something I very much learned at Coinbase, and I'm looking forward to at Farcaster if we should get there, is you shift into actually like, I'm not doing anymore. I'm leading and managing. And so that is actually a different skill set and a different feel for how you'd work with me. I would say that like, regardless of whether I'm kind of like in this player coach mode or I'm, in a strict management, I think low ego truth seeking is very much something that I would hope people would say. Yeah. And straightforward, right? Like I hate being messaged to, like in terms of like, oh, we're going to say it like this. It's like, say it like it is in plain language, and treat people like they're smart, right? Like don't assume like, oh, well, if we say it, we did some of that at Coinbase when we hired some of these execs, and I just always felt like it was off. And to be clear, I think Brian actually has more asserted now his style of leadership there, which I think is like, he's going to say it like it is. And I very much think that. I think another thing that I think leaders eat last is a good, just like way to think. At least that's how I enjoy when I worked for other people. And so this idea that like, I mean, just subtle things of like, okay, like we're all in this together, and then we win and fail together, right? There is no version where the team isn't doing well and the founders are doing well. And so I think that manifests in a variety of different ways, but like I very much like, my goal is to make Farcaster successful. And in doing so, I think that one achieves the thing I'm hoping to do, but more importantly, I also think it's like the team benefits from that success, right? So it's like, I think that's very rewarding to me. And part of that is like, I very much had a life-changing experience at Coinbase. And so as a result of Brian and Fred's leadership and this idea of like the team benefits when the company benefits, that was a life-changing outcome for me. And so the idea that if the work that I'm doing and leadership that I'm doing, like, can do the same for a bunch of other people that have taken the bet on me and kind of the vision that Varun and I are trying to achieve, that's deeply satisfying. Frankly, like in a way that I don't think actually people outside a team or a company having done that would understand. Yeah. Right? Like I think that there's actually a lot of framing of like, oh, I'm an employee, or kind of like labor versus capital. Like it's just like all this like abstract stuff, which does that exist in the world? Yes, for sure. But I actually think early stage startups with strong cultures and founders that are actually team oriented, it really does feel like you win and lose as a team. And I think that, like, at least my experiences. And so I would hope that folks who've worked with us feel that way versus maybe something a little bit more adversarial.
That's great. I'm hearing an element of pay it forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the single biggest thing that's great about Silicon Valley that you cannot model, like if you were to say, oh, we want to build Silicon Valley here or there, it's like we need a research university and we need, it's a cultural thing that I think
Mm.
just like it's the amount of people who are willing to, um, they could be super famous, super rich, super successful, and they're willing to spend their time with you through a warm intro or frankly a cold outreach. It's I think really extraordinary. And I don't think any other culture, at least that I've experienced or heard, like I think it tends to be a bit more hierarchical. And I think there's always the joke that in Silicon Valley, it's like, and I've had this manifest for me, like the guy in the hoodie who doesn't seem that impressive 4 or 5 years from now could be leading like the hottest new startup. And they had some wacky ideas back then, and you kind of any other place in the world, people with wacky ideas, people just kind of like, oh yeah, you're the one with the kooky ideas. But it's like Silicon Valley is the place for those people and those people to have these extraordinary outcomes, not just from a business standpoint, but just like impact on the world.
Mm.
And so it's a humbling thing in the sense that you try to actually meet every person, or some people don't do this, but I think like the people who are good at Silicon Valley realize like behind every wacky kooky person you might meet, there could be actually some interesting novel insight about the world that if they are able to kind of hit the right seam, like they're the next big thing. And it's one of the
Yeah.
reasons I think that some of these founders, it's so easy to make fun of them, and, Silicon Valley and all these other kind of things. But it's like they are just wired different,
Yeah.
right? I think of myself as a more like quote normal person in the Silicon Valley scheme of things. But I think like when I sometimes think it's like I also am pretty quirky and weird in some ways. But I think all the way back on that is like I think that pay it forward culture, I think
Right.
it's just so hard to replicate because
Yeah.
it's actually you can't top down that. It is a
No.
compounding thing of generations of people that have developed this culture.
Yeah.
It's not religious. Like I'm not a, but that is actually more akin to it. It's like you kind of get a through osmosis. You realize that's how things work here.
Yeah.
And there's actually a
But
status component to it. It's like if you're actually good at that, like it actually increases your status, and then like more people want to like send the next Mark Zuckerberg or whatever to you. So you could say it's self-interested, but like I don't know. I've never met a group of people who, on a relative basis, on their status and importance, that is willing to engage with basically a nobody. And you just
mhm.
hear so many stories of it like that. And so that's why I always, when people are like, "Oh, should I move to SF?" I'm like, "There is no place like it."
Yeah.
And there are plenty of dysfunctional things about it, but I think if you're in that world and care about that game, it is it a pretty special place.
Mm. Dan, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for sharing your time. I like to close with takeaways. I'm going to share a thought that came up for me, and I'd be curious to hear if anything came up for you um, over the course of our conversation today. Something that you mentioned, cultural immune system. You gave a lot of examples of the importance of being really intentional about your culture and the decisions that you make or don't make every single day. When I walk by the trash can that's full, what do I do? So I'm either reinforcing something or I'm choosing to ignore it. And this is going to be an idea I'll think about more, I'm sure. Is what am I doing to reinforce or strengthen in a positive way the cultural immune system that exists within this team and help make that really special. So I've never thought of that idea before. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious, what came up for you over the course of our conversation today?
It was interesting. I hadn't really reflected on my time at Coinbase from a management leadership standpoint, and maybe in a passing thought, but like more in depth. And um, it made me think is that like it's something that's been in my head for a while. Is um, I think a lot of people think being a good founder or good leader is innate, and I think that there is some of that. I mean, you could be charismatic and you can have a high EQ, and so you just naturally are good with people, right? But I think that even those people still need to go through hard, painful
Mm-hmm.
lessons in order to kind of calibrate as to, oh, okay, just because I'm charismatic and I can get people to like me, that actually doesn't solve the problem of like when you need to actually let someone go.
Right.
That you need to learn that, and no matter how good you are, charismatic you are, and how high EQ you are, that is not a natural like thing. You don't do that very often, right? And so, I think that is like a takeaway that from this conversation is like, and I'm sure it maybe exists out there, but like it just made me think that there's a lot of stuff around management that like I think gets bundled into just like this is what it's like to be a founder. And I think one, I don't think it's as binary, and then two, I think it's under discussed as in like, okay, when you go from 20 people to 200 people, there's a good advice for probably stars as you start to get to 200 because you have executives, but maybe from 10 to 20 and 20 to 40, what should you be doing kind of as a founder? Because you're still probably your hand is in a bunch of pots, but you're actually needing to develop that management.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
you've made a great case today about in terms of what you should be doing, focusing on culture.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing, Dan, your time and your wisdom. And folks listening, thank you for listening. Thanks for tuning into the Delta Podcast. This episode features original music by Alice Carolyn, with editing and graphic design by Emma Kogan. If you're ready to lead through change, stay with us, my friends. It's always a great day to be coachable.